YouTube? Tim Kirk here again, and today we're going to discuss tabletop post-apocalyptic role-playing games, a continuance of the series of videos I've been doing lately. However, before we address the game that I'm discussing this time, I would like to mention this, since several people have asked me about the picture over my left-hand shoulder. This is Silverlion, a superhero character I created, which originally was used in a tabletop role-playing game, and since has grown to a life of his own. I've written stories about him, I've done quite a bit of my own art about him, and unfortunately, you'll probably never see that because it's just sort of my own doodling and meandering ideas. Someday, however, a polished version may appear. This particular piece of art was done by a friend of mine through DeviantArt, and he produced it. It's a bit more robust than the versions of Silverlion I draw, and his was really good, however, despite not exactly fitting my vision of the character, and I was good with that because it's nice to see other people's interpretation of the same ideas. My wife saw the picture, thought it was great, and bought it for me through DeviantArt's print process as a gift. And so it's hung on my wall as an exemplar of how a small idea can grow big and be interesting even when it's not all exactly the way you originally saw it. And that's a good thing. Sometimes we have to let ideas grow on their own and expand beyond our initial perceptions. Now, today, we're going to discuss a tabletop role-playing game known as Wasteworld. It was published in 97, I believe. Yep, 97, by Manticore. And from what I understand, it was published in Poland and then brought to us, I guess, through whatever arrangements they had, but it wasn't widespread, and that's a real shame. I can talk about Gamma World or Atomic Highway. Gamma World has a version that's still available. Atomic Highway has a version that's still available, and even if you want one of the older versions of Gamma World, you can probably dig one up. I'm not sure how likely it is you can dig up a copy of Wasteworld readily. Now, whether you want to pay what those out of print games cost, that's up to you. Now, Wasteworld uses a very simple system, a d20 plus stat plus skill versus an opposed number, which is usually generated by an opposing force, which is a d20 plus stat plus skill, and you compare the differences of the two numbers that you have generated. Now, in gaming, sometimes these ideas occur repetitively. In fact, this system is very, very similar to the system used in Talislanta. And that's kind of a great thing, because Talislanta is one of my favorite tabletop fantasy role-playing games, because it's not traditional, and it has a simple system, and it has a lot of depth. And Wasteworld is kind of interesting in that same way, is despite the fact that it was not widespread, it's got a lot of material, and it is very decently written, and it's got a lot of really good ideas. In this tabletop role-playing game, the only reason it is not my first favorite post-apocalyptic game is it doesn't take place on Earth. It takes place on an alien world where they once had space travel and all these wonders and have since collapsed inward into the post-apocalyptic barbarism. Now, there are surviving city-states that have fairly sufficiently advanced technology to do some impressive things, but none of them can rebuild what they had, especially since they're in conflict with each other. You can play powered armor characters, you can play robots, you can play aliens, you can play mutants, you can play psychics, called psychomaguses. And in general, it is a very wild and crazy wahoo-ish game. It's got a lot of craziness in it, but it's still got a bunch of grit to it. So that's one of those things that I talked about early on, in that you can have some wild ideas out there and still have a gritty or darker game, rather than a silly game, or a, we're not talking about bears riding unicycles kind of game. We're talking about a bear that's been cyborged up with autocannons on its shoulders kind of game, and it's coming for you while you're asleep in the middle of the desert, huddling against the cold as the dust blows past you. I mean, We're talking, it is a dangerous world. It is a wonderfully well-written system. It is fairly balanced. And in fact, what makes the game interesting, and I've told people this, is there's a few other post-apocalyptic games on the market that have the wide variety of options. Robots, cyborgs, whatever. But this one did it, and did it with a system that works those things together in such a way that they're fairly balanced against each other. Not perfectly. No game is going to be perfectly balanced. Not any of them. And that's my view. And Wasteworld is one that really deserved getting looked at. And as I said, or maybe I should say, because I'm not sure if I said it earlier or on a previous video, that it didn't quite work out, because these are unscripted and things happen. I cough, I scratch, my dog walks by. I have to sometimes reshoot these videos several times to get past. But this game, the only reason it's not my favorite tabletop role-playing game is for post-apocalypse, because I've got several favorites. But the only reason it's not my favorite post-apocalyptic game is it's not Earth. And with Earth we have options that we don't have when you give an alien world and give it to an apocalypse. We don't have the history, the memory. We don't have the geography that's familiar but subtly changed, that can make the game give a person who's playing it a sense of place and awareness. Instead, it's just another imaginary field that they can't quite connect to. Wherein, if I were doing a post-apocalyptic atomic highway game, I could take my current home city, use it, and when I tell them, okay, over here at this overpass, they know what I'm talking about, or that building over there, they know what I'm talking about. Even if I said it hundreds of years in the future, many of the things that make a city are still going to be there familiarly, because it organically evolved from the same common core that we know now. Whereas with an alien world where there is no common history, no common knowledge of it, you don't have that. You have fictional maps and fictional imaginary places that don't necessarily bring to the fore that sense of history or memory that I mentioned. That's not a bad thing all the time. But for a post-apocalyptic game, for me, it's not ideal. Because I like that sense of history and mystery and memory that I can throw at players. Especially when they know vaguely, like, there's this spot. I know this spot, and it's over here, and it looks like this, and they get there, and it's changed, but it's still familiar in a game. Of course, if you're in Texas like me, and you're making a post-apocalyptic role-playing game about Vancouver, Canada, and you've never been there, that's going to be very different. That's going to be more imaginary than it is built into the world that you're familiar with. Now, if you've been there, if you've lived there, like I have, you might be able to write around a Vancouver post-apocalyptic game and make it interesting, because there's a setting there that you've got elements of that you can fold in and then turn into an apocalyptic, remnant that you can use. So it all depends on your style of play, and this is something that comes up with superhero games too. To kind of tie it back up to my superhero character, is whether you choose a real city or a fictional city, you have to have a certain amount of information that drives people back towards the idea of a real place. And that can be done well or it can be done poorly. Wasteworld doesn't quite feel like a real place. It's a very solid game. It is one of the highest rated games, in my opinion, that I own. I would rate it like 9.99 out of 10. But that's one of the places where it misses, is it does not give you that tie back to reality that creates a sense of value in the play you get. Now, some people don't care. Some people just want to play a game and shoot things up, and that's okay too. It's a perfect game for that. It's a wonderful game even without that, but it's the only reason it is not my favorite #1 tabletop post-apocalyptic role-playing game. So, but to give you an idea of the kind of crazy things you can play, there are several source books. I don't own but this one. I've looked into finding others, but usually have not had the funds because the prices have been significantly high. This one, for example, is the Shogunate, which exists a cybernetic and genetically engineered, Shogunate, a very oriental feeling setting. It has ninjas and samurais, and they have energy weapons and beam swords and all this other crazy ultra technology, and they're all wrapped up in a little, arcology. But sometimes they have to go outside. Sometimes they have to interact with the other world and the other strange things. Like there's a city full of genetically engineered people, like crazy genetic engineering. There's a city controlled by computers. In fact, I think several of them are. And between them is the wastelands, which is where most of us see post-apocalyptic going, is the wastelands between the civilized spots, with the civilized spots usually not being quite as bright or quite as shiny as they are in Wasteworld. Still, you can play cybernetic samurai, you can play psychic ninja, you can play power armor wearing people, people with pet cybernetic tigers, you can play robots, mutants, whatever. It is a wild and wahoo setting, but it's also a gritty one. And that's an interesting thing, especially when you draw it back to the fact that it doesn't quite tie back to Earth and the history of Earth quite well, in that it allows you to go places you probably couldn't go with an Earth setting. So again, it's a highly rated game by me because while it doesn't quite give me everything, it gives me 99.999% of what I would like out of a game. A post-apocalyptic game. I strongly encourage you to look around and see if you would get it. I wish whoever owned the rights to it would put it out in PDF and sell it to us, or even, start PODing it, because I have no idea who owns it these days. But it would be wonderful to make it available again with the current electronic technologies we have. So if anybody knows anyone, if anybody's heard of this game, if anyone has any ideas on how to get it back in circulation again without billions of dollars of money, let me know. Let's see if we can drop a line to somebody and talk to them and say, hey, what do you think? Could you try this? Would you be willing to try this? The worst they can say is no, and, at least you asked. All right, gentle people, I'm going to be going. Next time we will talk about a lower rated game, just to give you some contrast on where I put certain games and what kinds of things I look for that aren't fulfilled in a game. So take it easy and good gaming.